Well, good afternoon to everyone that's joining us from across the United States and around the world. We appreciate it. Welcome to Disaster Management and Incident Response Symposium, brought to you by American City and County Urgent Communications and IWCE. And we're very happy to say that this session is sponsored by ROK Technologies. This session, one of two, is titled Optimizing Emergency Response, Locate and Assess Incidents Quickly. I'm Lance Valcour. I'm a retired inspector from the Ottawa Police in Canada, and I'll be your moderator today. And we just have a few housekeeping issues to go through. The slides will advance automatically through the event, and you can also download the slides and other resources from the resource folder available via widget at the bottom of the console. You can, at any point, submit questions to our presenters through the Q&A window. If you happen to be having any technical issues, that's the same place you'll go, and one of the team members will respond to you directly there. You can also hit F5 or Command R on a Mac, and this will refresh your console and audio stream. Now we're going to move on to our conversation about optimizing emergency response, locate and assess incidents quickly. Today, we'll be hearing from three experts from across the states: Sergeant Robert Dooley, Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Program, Florida Highway Patrol, who you can see in his police car. He'll explain kind of what's going on there. We have Arar Siddiqui, a project manager from Arlington County Department of Emergency Communications, and Jason Harris, who is the Chief Technology Officer from ROK Technologies. Their bios and information is on their console. So let's get this started. I'm going to kick things off. Just a little bit of background. My first involvement in this space was in 1979. I joined the Ottawa Police in 1977, and we used to have to walk the beat for 5 years. And it gets quite cold up here. And so one very, very cold winter's night, a midnight shift, the inspector came in and said, "We need someone to go work in comm center for a year." I put my hand in the air and said, "Okay, that's got to be better than freezing my butt off for the next kind of year or two." And within about a week of being there, that inspector came in and said, "We're getting some kind of newfangled computers, including computers in the police cars." So again, this was 1979. And because I was by far the most junior person in the room, I was tasked with that. So we've come an awfully long way since then. Now, you know, the ability to kind of send messages to car and car to dispatcher, which got some people in some trouble over the years, was pretty cool. But things like advanced GIS and all the other kinds of things that you're mostly on this call are very well aware of and have been using for a long time, they were just a dream. So very happy to be a part of this conversation and looking forward to hearing from our three expert panel members. And I'm going to kick it over to Rob to talk to us, if you could, and maybe a little bit about why you're in your car and what's happening today, and then emergency response capabilities in Florida. Rob, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sergeant Robert Dooley with the Florida Highway Patrol. I am our statewide unmanned aerial vehicle coordinator. I also oversee all of our counter unmanned aerial systems detection equipment as well. A little background on myself: 22 years as a Florida State Trooper. I have been the statewide coordinator for our unmanned system since 2016. We work really hard. Our program grows and grows and grows. It just never seems to stop. But we cover the entire state of Florida. We handle 20 different judicial circuits. And more importantly, we go to every single disaster, both man-made and natural, within the state, and we also go out of state quite often as well. One of the most key and important components about what we do when we respond to disasters is, number one, we don't know what we're getting into half the time. Number two, we don't know what to prepare for. Hold on one second, sorry. I apologize. I got like 50 things cooking on the stove today. We don't know what we're getting into. So the way that we respond to disasters and other things that require a large law enforcement or first responder response is we tend to, for lack of a better description, bring a machine gun to swat a fly. We don't know what we're getting into. For those of you that have lived in an area where you can potentially get hurricanes or wildfires or things of that nature, something that may start off small or not intending to hit your area turns into a Cat 5 hurricane that's going to make a direct hit. We strategically stage our teams all over the state of Florida, from Pensacola all the way down to the Florida Keys, so that way, no matter what we need to do and how we need to respond, for example, let's say, God forbid, a hurricane is going to hit the West Coast. We won't call on those teams to respond because they have to take care of their families and their homes. We have teams in other areas of the state that start responding as soon as we hit the word go. So when we arrive, normally most of our stakeholders around the general area, they don't know what they need. Again, you can plan for the worst and again be surprised very quickly. They may have communication equipment knocked out that they weren't anticipating being knocked out. They may have roadways that have flooded or been blocked that they weren't anticipating, etc. And it's my job and our team's job to get there without being asked and without being prompted to do so, and start looking for all the needs that are there ahead of time and shortly after the storm passes, and start providing that information to the stakeholders that need it. For example, Hurricane Ian was probably one of the largest hurricanes to devastate Florida in recent years. It was supposed to hit Tampa. We had planned for it to hit Tampa. And then within 24 hours, it is hitting Fort Myers. That creates a tremendous amount of issue. Now we have to adjust our resources and where they're heading to about 4 hours south. And on top of that, start coordinating evacuation efforts for a lot of those smaller islands and different things that should not be riding out a storm of that size. So our teams will not only go out after a storm is hit, but will also go out before a storm hit, and we'll put up our UAVs, and we have the ability to stream it seamlessly to all our stakeholders. So our Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee, Florida, where all the decision makers are, they're getting the live information. How does traffic look? Do we need more resources? Do we need to stage other things, or do we need to rethink how we're doing this? Not to mention our local command staff, who also has to adjust on the fly, our sheriff's departments, our police departments, our local emergency operations centers. There's a lot of stakeholders involved when we deploy, and there's a lot of people that need this critical information prior to a storm making landfall. And then we go radio silent because we have to seek shelter. And then as soon as the storm passes, within minutes of us getting all clear, we're back out. And now we're going from assessing things to get people out. Now we're assessing things of how to get resources in. Hurricane Ian brought a tremendous amount of flooding to areas that don't normally flood. You're looking at a Google Earth map trying to get to a location, and it looks like it's flat and the roads are clear, and you're staring at a lake that shouldn't be there. We had one case in point where it was very dark. Luckily, someone was familiar with the area. We stopped, we put the drone up and started to fly out. And we realized that this water was super deep because all we could see was the tip corner of a commercial motor vehicle, a semi-tractor trailer barely protruding from the water line, telling us that sucker was at least 12 to 13 feet deep, if not more. So there's a lot of information that we provide, but more importantly, we bring the communication equipment needed to get this information out in real time to the decision makers. Example, Starlinks for us have really changed the game. We've been using cellular bonded communication devices for years, back when that was kind of like a fringe science through PepWave and some of the other things. The whole point is that it's not just myself and my team that need the information or someone locally. Disasters are being managed regardless of where you are in the country from some centralized location. And it's our job to get that information to them in a timely fashion and make it good information, accurate information, so that those resources can start getting in there and people can start getting back to normal in a timely fashion. During that 22-year period that I've been a state trooper, I've responded to every single natural and man-made disaster that's occurred in Florida. It doesn't have to be natural. It can be man-made. The Surfside condo collapse, that made national headlines. That requires a very, very well-organized, coordinated effort in order to respond. You've got federal entities responding, state entities responding, county and local entities responding. Then those questions that pop up, who's in charge, all those different things. So I think that the Florida Highway Patrol does a phenomenal job of not only responding, but more importantly, being that supportive role when needed and being that leadership role when needed as well. During that time, we've cultivated a lot of different technologies that go into disaster management. For example, again, something as simple as putting a drone in the air versus boots on the ground. Things that used to take us 4 or 5 squads of troopers, we can now accomplish with 1 squad of troopers and a drone pilot. Things that used to take hours or days to get information to those decision makers, now it's in real time or within seconds. Down to us, we talked earlier with Jason about GIS and Esri and different things, mapping large scale areas in a short amount of time to give people a very usable map of what it actually looks like within minutes versus having to assess it and getting resources down there. It may take hours or days for that to happen, and we're able to accomplish a lot of that stuff in a very short period of time. We do a tremendous amount of search and rescue and damage assessment. Our team does a lot. It's not just limited to natural disasters. But when it comes to this stuff, this is something that we do very well. We've been doing for a long time. We are the largest principal responding force in the state of Florida. We send hundreds and hundreds of troopers to a devastated area to make sure that the recovery efforts start as soon as humanly possible. And something as simple as, doing a welfare check. A lot of people don't realize that when communications are out and maybe your mother, who's elderly, is in a beach area of Florida that was devastated, something as simple as finding them and getting them on the phone with a loved one. It goes from extreme down to something as simple as just giving someone that A-OK that their loved one is fine and they're taken care of. So there's a lot of stuff that we do in Florida. Again, I'm eager to hear your questions and provide whatever information I can. But that's in a nutshell for when it comes to disasters and disaster management. Just to recap, it's not just about us. This is not a particular county that was this is a Florida thing. And so whatever we have to do to get information, whether it be at the state level, federal level, county level, but also providing tremendous information to our other stakeholders in the private sector. Everybody wants their lights back on, right? They may need information that we have. Everybody wants their cell phones to start working. Those entities may need information that we have. Everybody wants to know when the gas lines are going to open up, when the grocery stores are stocked. There's just a tremendous amount of stuff that goes into it. It's not just getting pretty photographs of devastated areas. It's about providing real time information to our decision makers and our stakeholders so that way the recovery process starts immediately once we start assessing everything. But that's all I got. Again, I'm Sergeant Robert Dooley, the Florida Highway Patrol.
Thanks very much. I've got a million questions, but before we get to those, we're going to go over to Arar from Arlington, and maybe you can give us a bit of a high-level update on kind of how things happen there.
Thanks, guys. I'm filling in short term here for Jeff Wobbleton, so I appreciate being involved in this. So in Arlington County, well, a little bit on me. I'm Arar Siddiqui. I've been here in Arlington for 17 years. I've worked in just about every aspect of 911, and my current role and role for the last 5 years has been as a technology program manager. So I manage the phone system, I manage CAD and remote programs, and half a dozen other programs that are all kind of interrelated to that. Our major focus here in Arlington has been how do we improve our processes, understanding the process and then improving it so that we can deliver faster and better to the citizens of our county. And one of the things that we've realized is we were doing entirely too much in terms of calls coming in and trying to process everything that we could possibly process through the call taker. That was slowing down our call taking process. It was slowing down our dispatching process. And as we all know, industry-wide, there is a substantial staffing shortage. So we're facing that on our end as well. The answer to meeting the rising demand with dwindling supply of call takers and dispatchers is to use technology. So here we're using the cloud. We're using other web apps. For instance, we signed a contract recently with Autora, and we implemented Autora back in June to start taking away some of our private tow calls. That's roughly 26,000 calls a year that we're hoping to mitigate. We're working on a web portal for reporting fire prevention records. That's another potentially 38,000 calls that we have every year that we could mitigate. And then getting the citizens used to the launch of Amazon.com, where we're kind of getting the non-emergency calls funneled to other departments. We're making information like where to call to find out where your car is when it gets towed available to citizens via web links, which Amazon can definitely provide. And we're growing that as well. We're going to be looking at pushing our CAD system into the cloud so that we can dispatch and call take from anywhere. And we're also working on the phone system as well, going into the cloud so that we can, answer calls from anywhere along with dispatching them and processing them through CAD. So that's kind of where we are right now in the midst of this sort of technological revolution here in Arlington, and we're kind of following our local jurisdictions and assisting them in coming along with us in that evolution.
Thanks very much. Fascinating. And again, tons of questions to come, both from me and the audience, I'm sure. And again, a reminder to the audience, you can start to ask questions. We'll get to those in a few minutes, but you can start to fill those in, and I'll be moderating those as we move on. Thanks, Arar. And then Jason, over to you to talk a little bit about emergency response infrastructure.
All right. Thank you very much. I am going to attempt to share my screen. I have a couple of slides that it's easier for me to just sort of use those. Did those slides come up? Everybody see that?
Good.
All right, great. So again, yeah, my name is Jason Harris. I'm the CTO at ROK Technologies. And what we do is host and manage other organizations' enterprise GIS systems in the cloud. And that's strictly all we do. So it's our job to make sure that your GIS is up, running in times of normal operation, but most importantly in times of disasters, emergencies. Hopefully, I'm going to guess that most of you guys understand, like a GIS is really a vital tool when managing disasters. The frequency of these natural disasters, sometimes the intensity, they're just rising. Global warming, population change, etc. But these, GIS is an important tool for the citizens, decision makers to gain valuable insights, from GIS, which is obviously, it's a very powerful technology. Not only is it important for planning for disaster, obviously it's also important for responding to a disaster. For example, a GIS is crucial for example, planning for debris removal before or after potentially, a big hurricane. I don't think I'm telling you something that you don't already know. I'm sure all of us here have heard of GIS and work with it, but it's absolutely crucial to responding and preparing for these types of natural disasters that we can often see. So here's a couple of phases. I wanted to just consider a couple of really quick key points. We know that your GIS is absolutely vital for coordinating, a response to a natural disaster. Now consider if that same natural disaster affected your ability to respond, which is what I'm talking about. So did the hurricane, like Sergeant Dooley was talking about, or a wildfire in other parts of the country, sometimes Florida too, what if those natural disasters actually affected, your data center, right, or your office. You need to be sure that no matter what, your servers, your infrastructure, and GIS remain accessible. Lots of times, many cases, the public, right, they're very dependent on your GIS, making sure that it's up and running, and all of the associated applications, right? Think about a county or a state issuing evacuation orders, and they send out and said, if you're in a evacuation zone 5, then you have to evacuate. Now, how does that information get disseminated out to the public? It's usually from a GIS web map, right? So what happens when all of those people are swamping your server all at the same time? Do you have that ability to scale up your system to make sure that that it's going to be able to scale to meet the traffic demand, right? Usually that hurricane evacuation map might get a couple of hundred hits a day, a couple of thousand a day. When that scales to an entire county, an entire city, or an entire state, is your system going to be able to meet that demand? These are questions that you should be asking yourself now, right? Most times, if your infrastructure is on premise, your ability to scale to meet that demand is going to be somewhat limited, right? Not somewhat limited, probably very limited. That's when having your infrastructure, your critical infrastructure, and your GIS systems in a cloud environment would be a great place. It's out of the disaster zone, and you're also going to have that ability to essentially infinitely scale your resources to meet that demand. We see that happen all too many times. The hurricane's coming, the evac map goes out, or citizens need to get to that resource, and it just becomes overwhelmed and crashes the server. So that's really not doing anybody any good. If the information you're trying to get to your citizens is just not going to be able to make it out, it's going to crash. So real quick, just want to talk real briefly about disaster recovery and high availability in a cloud environment. This is much like I just spoke about. All of those, the cloud hyperscalers, what we call them, like AWS or Azure, they have this built-in technology to make sure that your systems can be resilient, highly available, and most important in these types of situations, scalable, right? You want to be able to scale your systems and recover from any kind of disaster. So this is for folks that are already there or considering moving to a cloud environment. Just a couple of quick tips on how to keep that system up running, robust with HA and disaster recovery abilities. You always want to take frequent snapshots of your environment. I know I'm going to get a little technical here. I'm going to get into the weeds, and we can ask some more questions if there's more specific stuff about keeping up a highly available system, or making sure you have proper disaster recovery. But as an organization, as a baseline, we like to take these machine snapshots, at least twice a day. You can get more aggressive with that depending on your organization, but that basically is going to keep a copy of your exact system as it stands twice per day. And we ship those off to a secondary geographic zone, right? So if a hurricane is going to hit a data center in Florida, right? A, do you want to have your servers running in that disaster zone? And B, do you want to store your backups in that same disaster zone? Hopefully you can figure out that the answer is no, right? We want to store those backups in a totally secondary geographic zone. And if we have that option, we would prefer to not have your actual infrastructure, your GIS applications, your E911 systems, things like that, running in that same disaster-prone area, right? That's one reason that you'll see most of these hyperscaler data centers are located outside of what we would call typical disaster zones, right? Virginia is a big one. That's where most folks, most of the big hyperscalers are. California is another big one. Northern California, I should say, out of the earthquake zone. Anyway, Also, and I won't, again, I'll try not to get too technical, but the best preparation for a disaster, responding to a disaster, again, with the GIS component specifically, whether this is like a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, like which we all experienced, myself included, stuck in the airport for a day and a half last Friday. You want to have a plan to recover before something happens, right? You have to test your disaster recovery. You've got to have that plan in place before something like that hits. Extremely, extremely important. To be honest, when you get that plan together and you do your disaster recovery, you plan, you test your plan. Are you going to meet all of your goals? Probably not. Let's be honest. You're probably going to do most of it right, but you got to take that opportunity to learn from your mistakes and then plan again, then test again. And this is it's always going to be an ongoing exercise. Just remember that the absolute best preparation for a disaster is to accept that disaster is going to happen and plan accordingly. It's all about how you're going to be able to respond, right? So it's people like me and the company I work for, it's our job to make sure that really critical infrastructure is up and running when these types of events happen, so that Sid and Sergeant Dooley can continue to work and disseminate that information out to the public, to all your citizens and interdepartmental. That's my quick 2-minute review. I hope you guys have lots and lots of questions. I could talk nerdy all day about this kind of stuff, so hopefully you bring them our way. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Jason. Just so people are aware, Rob, Rob is actually called into kind of an operational thing. He will try to pop back in. Oh, there he is, as required. And so I'm going to throw the first question over to you, Rob. You talked a lot about all this massive amount of information and how you're getting that to decision makers in Tallahassee or wherever they might be. Are you using tools like, for example, AI, or I'm not sure what, to try to, there's so much data. How do you help them get to you? Here's the 3 things you need to look at, boss, right? This drone feed or this body camera feed, or are you finding ways to help them make those decisions and not just inundate them with a million petabytes of stuff?
Yeah, so AI is not really in the picture for us right now. Again, I'd prefer that the Terminator not show up one day and ask for Sarah Connor, but just joking. But in a nutshell, no, we use GIS and a lot of other analytical background software if we needed to, like, for example, we work a lot with our stakeholders in the utilities department. Our wildlife management, our water districts, our power and light districts that also provide a tremendous amount of information. And it's a lot more seamless when we're all on the same page using the same platforms they can overlay a lot of tremendous data over top of that. The biggest struggle that we have is we have so many stakeholders that we provide information to, and not all of them are as capable of downloading that information. So we try to keep it as simple as humanly possible. Number one, like within a few days of the storm, the biggest ask that we get is what roads are open, what are closed. And we're able to at least provide them those maps with the roadway overlays, with the flooding, or maybe the cut teams from the highway patrol that have the chainsaws haven't gotten to certain areas yet. But we do have a lot of analytics. That's where our analysts come into play in Tallahassee. So I'm out collecting the data and running those projects because we do have a mobile command vehicle that we bring for our drone team. It helps us mitigate airspace. It helps us to provide additional resources to agencies that are showing up with unmanned technology, but don't really bring a lot of stuff with them, so they could dump the data on us and we'll get it up to our stakeholders. But we utilize the state EOC's analysts. We use our analysts and a couple other stakeholders like Florida Department of Emergency Management, and we will pinpoint those things in our maps. And then because our maps are normally the largest because we're in so many areas, they'll start overlaying that map. And when those requests come in from the local county or our municipal EOCs, they're able to just data dump that and explain it a lot quicker than someone that needs a particular software to interpret or whatever. Again, most of these resources will not exist. Backup generators fail, they may not have power, etc. They may not, their super fancy satellite systems may not be operational. They may have gotten knocked out in the storms. Whatever the case is, it doesn't matter whether we need to run a thumb drive over to them or whether we need to have a data dump from the state EOC. We try to make it a centralized repository. Everyone knows in the state of Florida when disaster strikes, you're going to request the information from the state EOC, not the ground trooper. They don't know who I am. It's all going to come through there, but that's where the knowledge and experience of going to every hurricane for 22 years, I know exactly who needs it, where they can access it, and more importantly, I have a centralized repository that anybody can ask for it, and all they got to do is just shoot an email, make a request, or a simple phone call or text message. However they can communicate, and that information is theirs.
Thanks, Rob. Arar, over to you. Just a question about, you talked a little bit, I believe, about remote call taking, and what's the future of that? I mean, when I worked there, you had to be in the office, right? Is that the future, or does it look something different in the next gen 911 world?
So, in my humble opinion, and from what one of the talking points was what lessons we learned from COVID, right? And in the 911 industry, we got extremely focused on building these fabulous centers with all of this technology that everyone could utilize, all the resources in one spot, and that one spot would be where we would do business from. And I think if the one big lesson we took away from COVID is, what if that spot gets taken away? What if the very ability for us to gather and share those resources on a personal level goes away? Apologize. Let me silence my CAD machine here. So what if that center goes away? We're all carrying COVID. If we're all carrying influenza or something, and we're infecting our fellow coworkers, none of us is going to be able to come into a center and do any work. If we're getting exposed to this on the outside, we won't be able to carry on business. So the effective thing is to do distributive 911 call processing, right? You can take phone calls, you can process phone calls from multiple different locations. And this can be applied outside of just, some sort of a biohazard or something like COVID. If you're in a disaster, if you're living in Tampa, Florida, like much of my family, large chunk of my family does, I should say, and a hurricane comes along and knocks out power, knocks out everything, you're still going to need emergency services. If you could just relocate 100 miles away, 200 miles away, and still have access to every piece of data that you would have in your center, and still have access to your technology, then you could still provide emergency services. You could still connect with the officers, you could do firefighters, whoever else you're going in to manage that disaster. And the best way to do that is to, leverage technology. So here, what we're doing, at least on the short term, is where we developed a way to remote desktop in, or we can also use another application called Type VNC to desktop into a virtual desktop which runs our CAD system. And then whatever device you're on at home, whatever device that we've issued to you, for us, it's Microsoft Surface laptops, you can set up at home with a couple of screens, and you can just RDP into the primary machine or the virtualized machine and be able to run CAD. For our phone system, we got Vesta command posts from Motorola with Vesta loaded on them. And we were able to connect those through a VPN that they set up, so call takers can take phone calls at home. We also were able to work with Motorola to get 2 radios that we could use from different locations. So currently there is one of our employees is working on fire dispatch from home. He can log in, and we're testing it for about 4 hours a day. And he does the fire ground or the operations channel on Fireside for us, and that's going pretty well. So we've managed to mitigate some of the issues that we had where you're kind of stuck in one particular place to dispatch.
Lance, I think you might be muted.
Yeah, I think we lost some audio.
Yeah, sorry about that. Famous for terrible. Anyway, so thanks for that, Arar.
Sure.
We're starting to get the questions in from the audience. We appreciate that. And we have a question, Jason, we're going to throw it over to you from Dan. Actually, a couple of questions. I'll read them out because I don't believe people online can see these. So if I move my data to a cloud-based system, what happens when we lose our ability to connect to the internet? And a subsequent follow-on question is, and what is your recommendations for the best way to connect during worst case scenarios? So Jason, a couple of minutes on that, if you could.
Sure. All right, Dan, that's a good question, and we hear that a lot, right? And there's a couple of ways to look at it. If your organization loses internet and your let's just say your enterprise, I'm just going to say GIS in this case because that's what I'm most familiar with. If your GIS is located on premise and you lose internet, that means, generally speaking, the rest of your citizens are not going to be able to get to your data, right? So that's a problem. Now, if your GIS is located in the cloud and you lose internet at your office, that's also a problem, right? You're not going to be able to interact directly with your data if you have no internet. So in that case, generally what happens is those organizations will keep some type of an emergency set of data locally, and for the absolute most dire circumstances, right? If there's just no way for you to get internet and you can't reach that cloud-based system. However, on the good part of that is that since it is in the cloud, right, that information is still able to get out to first responders, to the citizens that do have internet, right? Most folks, again, like Sergeant Dooley was talking about, they're bringing in mobile hotspots. Now there's Starlink, right? You can get satellite connectivity. So that would be my sort of backup plan. I would always, if possible, have a Starlink sitting at my organization just in case we lost full connectivity. But again, there's a couple of ways to look at it. If it was me losing connectivity with my infrastructure on premise, that's far worse, I think, than losing than your citizens not being able to actually access that data. I think that's a far more important feature of moving your GIS system to the cloud.
Thanks very much, Rob. Are you still able to join us?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so we've got a question here from Karmish, and it is, please explain the process that you follow for identifying resources needed at the site of a disaster all the way up to the decision makers. Pretty high level, but.
Yeah, so that's actually a pretty simple answer, believe it or not. A bulk of it comes from experience in responding to a lot of this stuff. You know what the critical areas are going to be, regardless of whether they're damaged or not, whether you need to check on stuff. Again, most of our response is anticipatory. So one of the first things we're going to do is, as we're traveling, we're looking at road conditions. That's priority number one. Then we move into search and rescue and damage assessment. That's priority number two, because we have to get resources there that can facilitate a lot of the damage assessment, search and rescue. And then priority number three is linking up with our local partners to give them the data. Luckily, most of that stuff is set up ahead of time. Those are conference calls and all these things leading up to the storm. That information is simplified for someone like me. We keep things as trooper-proof as humanly possible. Simplified to where I have a list of contact information, addresses, etc. So the areas that not only I'm deploying to, because I'm not just a coordinator, I love being boots on the ground. You'll never find me in the office. I have an office somewhere. I don't rarely frequent it, but a lot of it comes from experience and knowing what the needs are going to be. And then as you assess those, then you start to get, once everybody locally starts to get up and running, they start to send out the requests, and you may have already facilitated that pretty quickly, and then you could just data dump it right to them. So that's a bulk of how we do it. A lot of it does come from experience. A lot of it does come from anticipating the need, because again, we can all prepare for a Cat 5 hurricane until a Cat 5 hurricane makes landfall. and then you have no idea what you need because everything's knocked out, roadways are flooded, they're damaged, you have bridges that have washed away, and those critical resources that are staged, like fuel, like ice, like food, like water, all the major elements of things that we need to get to our residents, they're stuck, right? So we need to unstuck them as quick as humanly possible. So that's a bulk of where we assess the needs. And then as day 2, day 3 starts to roll out from any type of a disaster, that's where things are slowly starting to get their cadence. The requests are coming in. And again, luckily, most of the time we've anticipated those needs and we can provide them very quickly.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Another question for Kamish for Arar. What are the technologies that you're currently using? And also, I don't know the answer to this question, but are you in Texas or Virginia?
So I'm in Virginia. I know Arlington, Texas exists as well. We get a lot of calls actually from there when people Google them and accidentally dial us. But yeah, no. So currently, in terms of CAD, we're on Central Square's Tiburon product, and then for Vesta, we're on Vesta 7.9, which we have Motorola providing for us. Our radio system I don't deal with too much. It's part of our wireless and interoperability division. I know those guys. I work with those guys. They're actually, their office is just 2 doors down from mine. Any questions for them, I can always field to them about that. But those are the 2 programs that I deal with. For remote program, like I said, we're RDPing into our CAD system from laptops, and that's coming over our VPN. We use Global Protect as our VPN to come into the county. The weakness of that, I would say, is the fact that we're still reliant on the fact that all of our CAD resources are located in basically 2 places, and that is the current ECC and also one of our data centers. So our databases are in the data center, but the quorum that runs our CAD and which all of our workstations connect to, it runs out of the ECC location, the primary location. With cloud, and we did recently sign a contract with Hexagon and are working with Hexagon to implement a new CAD system. That's going to change. That'll be in GovCloud, and we'll connect to it. There'll be some assets locally here that will allow us to communicate with the cloud, but the majority of the computational efforts of CAD will be conducted in the cloud.
Perfect. Thanks. Jason, over to you. There's a question from Jairus. Is there a common application that's being used to view the information being provided by GIS or other state-provided overlays?
Well, the answer is probably no. There is not a standard, although if you can, as close as a standard as you can get is probably Esri. There's an Esri. Esri is probably, it's by far the #1 GIS company. So there is not one application, but there's a set of GIS technology that's mostly used, and that's GIS by ESRI. That's probably the most common one. I wanted to build on Sid's answer. He was talking about moving his infrastructure into the cloud, and how do you work? He was talking about virtualized desktops and how do you get to these these compute locations, and that's a really another important aspect of not necessarily having all of your infrastructure local to your office, right? Having the ability to set up a virtualized remote desktop running in the cloud to interact with your data is hugely important. So back in the old days, right, we had to install everything on our local computer, and these things are gigantic, and we'd have to, and that we were tied to that desk no matter what. All the processing power, all that, all the money, all that stuff was sunk into that one computer that was sitting at our desk, right? Of course, we use that computer to talk to the other servers, and that still works. But what happens if we've got to evacuate? What happens if we have to leave our office? And all of the stuff that we use is sitting on our desktop computer or our laptop computer. Do we have to run back to the office, unplug our computer, and bring it with us? The answer is no. You need to get out as soon as you can. So what's the solution to that? And that's running running your own virtualized desktop, running that in a cloud environment. So that means if you're evacuating and you're in the car, you can get into your virtualized desktop from your tablet or a $100 Chromebook, or if you're away at a conference and you need to get in, all of that information that you're used to having, your GIS, your dispatch system, your Microsoft Teams, all that stuff is now located in a cloud virtualized desktop that you can reach from anywhere on any computer, like any thin client. Like I said, a cheap Chromebook, an iPad, an Android phone, you can always get to that information. That's really, really crucial.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Rob,
Yeah.
are you still with us? Looks like not. So, Arar, throwing it back to you. Sorry. One of the things that we've kind of skirted on today is the use of AI in 911. We've talked for some time, well over a decade, about the future of text to 911 and photos to 911 and videos to 911 and how powerful that would be. But someone actually has to look at all that stuff and make sense out of it. Plus, there's the whole post-traumatic stress, personal impact of seeing those terrible, terrible images. So, any thoughts on you talked a few minutes ago about the future of remote call taking, but the future of just in general, how AI may be able to help in the 911 world and in emergency response?
So when you consider AI, I think that the experience and personal touch that a human being brings is not something that you can replace right away with a bot. We're going to have to get significantly advanced with, any sort of an AI. I know, most. You can log into most websites now, or and for customer service, they have a chat bot that you can kind of chat with to answer your basic questions and things like that. We're kind of approaching that level in the 911 industry where that can happen for non-emergency issues. We could sort of replace a chatbot that can work with keywords and phrases to give people information about existing resources. How, at the 911 level where you're taking a call for an emergency, my grandfather's having a heart attack, my baby fell into the koi pond, which was actually a call we had here recently. Those kinds of things, I think, we're much further out where we're going to actually replace the call taker. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just going to take a long time for us to get there. But I think the bigger thing is for most centers in our region, and I would imagine that this is pretty much the case nationwide, the folks that I talk to, it seems to be the case. It is non-emergency calls, which we generally deal with, which are the bulk of the calls that we take. Almost 70% of them are routine things that AI could potentially handle right now if we could just leverage the technology to get there. And for us, we use Amazon Connect. That's going to be what we go forward with. We'll have some tertiary applications that are going to feed into it, like Autora, like Web Portal. I mentioned for fire prevention retention records and fire marshal services. But for right now, that's kind of where I see AI eventually going.
Just to follow on to that, what about the potential ability for AI to, if let's say 100 photos come in that are very graphic and very disturbing, the ability for AI to potentially, in seconds, sort them similar to what CATS used to do for child exploitation. I'm not sure if that still exists, but the ability to kind of say, okay, here's the one image, we've blurred out the worst of the worst, but this is going to help you dispatch because you can now see just how big this is. It's a massive deal here, right? Would you see potential there?
I definitely do see a potential there. As long as we can preserve the original image for whatever, for evidentiary purposes, I do see, the ability to filter things out as a good thing. I do believe that AI working at, milliseconds, or much faster than that. I think that we could use that to filter things out. I think also that we need to have the ability to make that information voluntary for both the call taker and for the citizen. If we can send the citizen a link, and right now that's kind of what we do with the AI that we have, they can choose to share their location with us. One of the applications that we're using, Rapid Deploy, we're able to get some Z access information from a person's phone by sending them a link that they can then click on. So AI filtering in terms of that is a good thing. So I definitely see the potential for that. I haven't seen a vendor that's capable of that yet. But it's something that we are driving, particularly Motorola, who we've had a lot of conversations about this technology with. That's where we're kind of directing them to go.
Yeah, I know. I was at Chicago at 5x5, PSCR and FirstNet, and they had some very fascinating experiments and whatnot that they're doing. And I know at IWCE there's some great stuff there. I personally see some real opportunity here. There's huge risks as you identified, but I see some great opportunity. Throwing it back to you, Jason, I know you have some personal experience, as you were telling us before the call started, with the outages, CrowdStrike outages. So
Yes.
Less about that struggle trying to get home, and more about what's the relevance of that kind of thing, whether it be that type of a situation or a much more nefarious state actor attack on kind of the future, and what does that impact on, from a cyber perspective, what does that do potentially for emergency response?
Right. That's a really good question. And it's funny, I kid you not, last week we actually had our internal disaster recovery scenario run internally, and it was almost the same as what just happened with CrowdStrike. Our scenario involved basically a third party patching, mass patching a system, and a bad patch made it through and basically took down the entire, all of the servers that we would manage. And the first thing that we thought about is, what can we do? How can we respond to this? And that's almost exactly what happened with CrowdStrike. They sent out a bad definition kernel. We can get into the weeds on exactly what it was, but they sent out some bad code, and that took down systems across the world, right? As I said before, the most important thing that you can possibly do is plan, right? Imagine that your entire system, all of your servers went down tonight. What would you be able to do to recover from that? That is absolutely paramount to any disaster recovery plan, right? If there is an emergency, right, these services that you are responsible for getting out to the public or responding to, how are you going to get your servers back up and running in a reasonable amount of time? And I can't stress this enough. It's that disaster recovery plan. It's run that plan, learn from that plan, and then test again, and then learn from that test and run it again. We've had, seen these mass outages happen across the internet before. This one was a really big one. It was really bad, and so again, just knowing what tools you have available to recover from recover from this type of situation is the most important. Luckily for us, in our plan, we were able to recover very, very quickly with a pretty simple rollback, right? That's one of the great things about the cloud, is we have that ability, hands off, to actually roll back a machine, as opposed to if it was installed directly on a server on premise. That's one of the benefits, and hopefully a lot of people learned from this mass outage that's a good way to go.
We've got maybe 5 minutes left, so I think you want to kind of expand a little bit about the Z-axis. I would have said Z, but I guess you're going to say Z. So.
My mom grew up in the English Standard and speaks British English, so I'm totally familiar with Z. So one of the more exciting projects that we started here and that I've been involved in was Z-Access. We partnered with a company called NextNav, and they use something called height over elevation, which uses the barometric sensors in a person's phone to provide you not only an XY coordinate but also a Z coordinate. So some of the tests that we've done, we did in my office building here. We were on the 7th floor, and they were able to use this with Android phones, Apple phones. We had FirstNet phones. We had different carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, and we were able to pull off those barometric sensors a good approximation of the height of where a person was when inside of a building. We elaborated this test during the 4th of July, we had a team go into Washington, D.C. They walked around the mall area. They went up and down the Washington Monument. They went down into the subway. We did various points in the Smithsonian Museum complex, and we were able to pull some really exciting data off of it. And obviously the purpose of this is hyper accurate location of where a caller is calling from. You know, our biggest weakness right now is, yes, we can get a building. You know, yes, we can get within 3 feet of a person, right? As long as we're looking at a 2-dimensional space. But where is that person inside of an apartment building? In Arlington County, we've got large, massive buildings that we're constructing, and you know, we can't always find out what floor these folks are on right away. So it's kind of a guessing game for first responders. Also, in the case of RIT and pulling firefighters out who get in trouble, if someone falls through a floor, how do you find that person? You know, now with the device, we've also been working with a company called Florian, and they make these small devices that can hook onto, you know, the person who's carrying them, and they can provide that Z-access location inside of a building. So it's one of the more exciting things. The ask that we have is we want other people, other agencies to also get excited about this, start talking about this. Let's get the issue is we need more people to work with companies like NextNav. So we need the carriers to get involved. We need, you know, local policymakers to get involved to kind of really drive the demand for this. So that's kind of why I brought it up in this forum. And if anyone wants to know more, I would, you know, just reach out to either me or Jeff Wobbleton here in Arlington County, and we can provide you with our data and our information that we have so far on these tests.
Perfect. Thanks very much. We're almost at the close. I want to thank everybody for their questions. Jason, I'll give you 30 seconds for your final comments, please, and then I need to close everything up. Can't hear you, Jason.
I mute myself. I don't really have my closing thought. There's one question in here from Paul Tremblay. I'm going to answer it because I know Paul. I just feel like I should answer your question. He asked a question about what 3 words, that application where you can give your location by actually saying 3 different words as opposed to GPS coordinates and, you know, lat long, all that stuff. Yeah, I use it, but I'm not sure what the applicable use would be here. I guess if everybody could memorize their 3 words, that'd be great. We could all know everybody's location in an emergency. That sounded a little off the wall, but I was just responding to that question. Anyway, closing remarks. Cloud, backup, disaster recovery, go.
Perfect. So as we wrap up our session, I'd like to thank everyone for attending the Optimizing Emergency Response, Locate, and Assess Incidents Quickly, as presented by American City and County, Urgent Communications, and IWCE. And again, thanks very much, Jason and our sponsors at ROK Technologies. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentations This session is copyrighted 2024 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by American City and County, Urgent Communications, and IWCE. And individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. By the way, I was told to read all this. Coming up next, we're going to hear from Donnie Jackson, which I'm looking forward to very much, in the next panel as they discuss preparing for the unknown, develop communications that will work in the face of disasters. On behalf of our speakers, the event organizers, and sponsors, thank you for your time, and we'll see you at the next session.